A week of readings with a nautical theme begins now with an extract from Patrick O'Brian's South Seas novel The Far Side of the World. HMS Surprise is drifting easily on calm seas. For the first time in months, Captain Jack Aubrey and Dr. Stephen Maturin have time to relax.
Day after day they sailed westwards along the line, or a little south of it. They left the penguins and the seals behind, all the inshore birds and almost all the fish. They left the gloom, the cool water, and the low-level cloud, and they sailed over a dark blue disk, perpetually renewed under a pale blue dome, occasionally flecked with high white clouds. These were waters largely unknown to the Navy. Byron, Wallace, and Cook had kept much further south or much further north, and this slow creeping over an apparently infinite sea fretted Jack to the heart. With surprising speed, the ship settled down to a perfectly regular existence. Very soon it became the natural way of life once more, and the Surprises looked back to the bitterly cold days south of the Horn as to another world. The sun shone every morning exactly on the frigate's wake. It shone on the new, cleaned decks, but soon they were hidden from view by awnings, for although this was not Gulf of Guinea hot, with the pitch bubbling from the seams and tar dripping from on high, the temperature was in the 80s, and shade was grateful. Everybody walked about in duck, except for invitations to the cabin, and even for them the midshipmen were excused their thick waistcoats. Yet they were perhaps the only people who were not quite pleased about the return to proper blue water sailoring with everything just so shipshape and Bristol fashion. Captain Aubrey had time now to lead the midshipmen through the mazes of navigation, while at night he made them learn the name, declination, and right ascension of a great many stars, and find out the angular distance between these and various planets or the moon. In the prodigious expanse of the Pacific, 1,000 miles seemed the natural unit. Another unit might be a poem. Stephen was reading the Iliad, and he was keeping to one book a day, no more, to make his pleasure last. He had begun a little while after leaving the Galapagos. He was now in book 12, and he reckoned that at the present rate of sailing he would finish just before they reached the Marquesas. He did his reading in the afternoons, for now that the days were calm and untroubled, he and Jack filled the evenings with the music they had been obliged to forego in more demanding waters. Night after night they played in the great cabin with the stern windows open, and the ship's wake flowing away in the darkness. Few things gave them more joy, and although they were as unlike in nationality, education, religion, appearance, and habit of mind as two men could well be, they were wholly at one when it came to working out variations on a theme, handing them to and fro, conversing with violin and cello. But on the evening of the day in which Stephen had reconciled Achilles and Agamemnon, and when the frigate's wake was rather better than 2,000 miles long, they did not play at all. This was partly because the ship was passing through an immense population of phosphorescent marine organisms, and had been passing through it ever since the dark red sun set into the misty sea, but even more because the hands had been turned up to sing and dance on the forecastle, and they were making much more noise than usual. "I am glad I cancelled the youngster's lesson," said Jack, looking through the open skylight. "There's scarcely a star to be seen. Jupiter's no more than a blur, and I do not suppose that even he will last another 5 minutes." "Perhaps it was on Wednesday," replied Stephen at the stern window, leaning out and far down. "I said Jupiter will not last 5 minutes, said Jack, in a voice calculated to drown the merriment of all. But it was badly calculated, not having taken the whalers into account, and they had just begun, away, my boys, 'tis time for us to go," in voices that would have suited the whales themselves. Stephen answered in a rather impatient tone, "Will you not pass me that long-handled net now? I've asked you 3 times, and there's a creature here I just cannot reach with this miserable—" Jack found the long-handled net quite soon, but when he came to pass it, there was no Stephen in the stern window, only a strangled voice from the wake. "A rope! A rope!" "Clap on to the cutter!" cried Jack as he dived straight in. He did not hail the ship on coming to the surface because he knew the red cutter was towing astern. Stephen would either see it or be towed towards it, and then they could regain the stern window without the ship's way being checked or her surgeon being still further exposed for what he was, the most hopeless lubber yet born. No cutter. Someone must have hauled the boat alongside. No Stephen either. But at that moment he saw and heard a gasping boil that rose and sank in the troubled phosphorescent water. He dived again, swimming deeper and deeper, until he saw his friend against the luminous surface. Stephen had become strangely entangled in the long-handled net, his head and one elbow tight in its meshes, its handle down the back of his shirt. Jack got him out, but breaking the stout handle, ripping off the shirt, and at the same time holding Stephen so that his head was above water, took some while, and when at last he drew breath and shouted, "Surprise! Ahoy!" The hail coincided with the roaring chorus of "There she blows, there she blows, there she blows," taken up by the whole ship's company. He'd set Stephen to float on his back, but an unfortunate ripple washing over his face sunk him again. Again he had to be brought up, and now Jack's "Surprise! Ahoy!" at the full pitch of his powerful lungs had an edge of anxiety to it. For although the ship was not sailing fast, every minute she moved more than 100 yards, and already her lights were dimming in the mist. Hail after hail after hail, enough to startle the dead. But when she was no more than the blur of the planet earlier in the night, he fell silent, and Stephen said,
"I am extremely concerned, Jack, that my awkwardness should have brought you into such very grave danger."
"Bless you," said Jack. "It ain't so very grave as all that. Killick's bound to come into the cabin in half an hour or so, and Sir Mowat will put the ship about. I shall hail every so often like a minute gun to help them. But you know, it would be no very great harm were we to wait until day. The water's warm as milk. There's no kind of sea apart from the swell, and if you stretch out your arms, stick out your belly, and throw your head back till your ears are awash, you will find you float as easy as kiss my hand." The minute-gun hails succeeded one another in a long, long series. Stephen floated easy, and they drifted westwards on the equatorial current. Jack reflected upon the relativity of motion, upon the difficulty of measuring speed if your ship is moving with it, and he wondered how Mowat would set about searching once the alarm was raised. If the observations were conscientiously made and the log accurately heaved, read, and recorded, then it would not be very hard for him to run back close-hauled or even with the wind 1 point free, always provided that the breeze remained steady. Each degree of error in the course of an hour and a half sailing at 4.5 knots would... In the midst of his calculations, he became aware that Stephen, lying there stiff as a board, was becoming distressed. "Stephen," he said, "turn over. Put your arms round my neck and we will swim for a little." Then, as he felt Stephen's feet on the backs of his legs, "You've not kicked off your shoes. Do you not know you must kick off your shoes, really, Stephen? What a fellow you are." So they went on, sometimes swimming gently, sometimes floating in the lukewarm sea, rising and falling on the long, regular swell. They did not talk much, though Stephen did observe that it was all very much easier now that he was allowed to change position from time to time. Even the act of floating came more naturally with use. And on another occasion he said, "I am deeply indebted to you, Jack, for supporting me in this way." Once Jack found that he must have slept a while, and once they were in the enormous presence of a whale. As far as they could make out in the phosphorescence, he was an old bull rather better than 80 feet long. He lay there for perhaps 10 minutes, spouting at steady intervals, and then with a great inward sigh he put down his head, raised his flukes, and silently vanished. Shortly after this the mist began to clear, and to his relief Jack saw that the dawn was closer than he had supposed. It was not that he had much hope of being rescued now. That had depended on Killick's looking into the cabin before going to bed. Clearly he had not done so, otherwise Mowat would have turned and picked them up sometime early in the middle watch, and the middle watch was already over. But if Mowat had not heard of their absence before morning, the Surprise would have sailed that much further west. She could not be brought back before the evening. The probability of error from the current would be very, very much greater, and in any case, he did not think they could hold out much beyond dawn. Although the sea had seemed so warm to begin with, they were both of them shivering convulsively by now. They were waterlogged. Jack was overcome with an enormous hunger, and both of them were haunted by the fear of sharks. Neither had spoken for a long time, apart from the brief words when they had changed position and when Jack towed Stephen on his shoulders for a while. There was very little hope now. Yet Jack did long for the light. The heat of the sun might revive them, and it was not inconceivable that a coral island might appear, although the charts showed none for 300 or 400 miles. What he really hoped for was a piece of driftwood. Palm trunks were almost indestructible, and in the last few days he had seen several drifting on the current, borne perhaps from the Guatemalan shore, and with one of those to buoy them up they could last all day and much, much more. He turned it over in his mind, the ways of dealing with a palm trunk, giving it some stability with an outrigger in the South Seas fashion. Almost wholly useless reflection, but better than the piercing, sterile regrets that had tormented him for the last few hours. Regrets about leaving Sophie surrounded with lawsuits. Regrets for not having managed things more cleverly. Bitter regret at having to leave life behind and all those he loved. The earth turned and the ocean with it. The water in which they swam turned towards the sun. Over in the west was the last of the night, and in the east to windward the first of the day. And there, clear against the lightning sky, lay a vessel, a large two-masted, double-hulled canoe whose broad platform had a thatched house upon it. The vessel had 2 towering fore and aft sails, each with a curved crest reaching forward. But these were details that Jack did not consciously observe until he had uttered a great roaring hail. It roused Stephen, who had been in something not far from a coma.
"A South Sea craft,"
said Jack, pointing, and he hailed again.
"Will they take us up, do you suppose?"
asked Stephen.
"Oh, surely,"
said Jack, and he saw a narrow outrigger canoe put off from the vessel's side, hoist a triangular sail, and come racing towards them. One young woman sat in the stern steering, another straddled the booms connecting the slender hull and the outrigger, balancing with wonderful grace. They were strikingly good-looking young women, brown, long-legged, dressed in little kilts and no more. Ordinarily Jack was attentive to an elegant form, but now he would not have cared if they had been old man baboons as long as they took him and Stephen aboard. He lifted up his hands and uttered a supplicatory croak. Stephen did the same, but the girls, laughing, filled and ran back the way they had come, sailing with extraordinary skill and speed unbelievably close to the wind. Yet as they swept off they made motions signifying perhaps that the outrigger was too frail for any more weight, and that Jack and Stephen might swim to the two-master. That was how Jack's willing mind interpreted them, and when they reached the double canoe these same girls and several others helped them up onto the mat-covered deck. There appeared to be a positive crowd of young women, and a good many older and stouter, but this was not the time for fine observation. Jack said, "Thank you. Thank you, ma'am," very earnestly to the cheerful helmswoman who had given him a particularly hearty hand, and looked all his gratitude at the rest, while Stephen said, "Ladies, I'm obliged beyond measure." Then they sat down, with hanging heads, scarcely aware of their pleasure, and shivered uncontrollably in the rising sun.
Benedict Cumberbatch was reading that extract from Patrick O'Brian's novel The Far Side of the World. The programme was produced by Lisa Osborne and was a Sweet Talk production for BBC Radio 4.